Good morning again.
Good morning.
Power is different in the Bible than how the world seems to think it works. Power we often attribute to positions of authority. We attribute to wealth and possessions. We attribute to the ability to command and tell others. But when power shows up in the Bible, it often shows up in ways that the world does not recognize. It shows up in forms and in people that others would dismiss. Power comes to us through the Holy Spirit, and it often comes in ways that we would not expect or see. If you think about it, God is a master at using the people that the rest of the world would dismiss. A lot of the prophets come from all sorts of backgrounds that people would not expect them to rise up. Even David, who was the youngest brother, you find the examples that God pulls people in that everyone else would say, who are they? Even Jesus, a carpenter, is used to change the world. And who does Jesus gather around him? A bunch of fishermen and other malcontents. And these are the people that God uses to change the world. Yet we are always surprised in some ways when God does it again and again, because we keep falling into the mindset of the world. We keep thinking that how the world sees it is the proper way, and we forget how we should be seeing the world. I don't know if any of you seen that commercial from the Bank of Nova Scotia. I don't even know if they run it anymore, but it always says, "You're richer than you think." Have you seen that one? I hate that commercial. I hate it because who are they to say I'm richer than I think? Do they know how much money I have? Well, actually, they do. They're my bank. But that's not the point. They look at you and they say, oh, you have more wealth. You have more money. You have, without understanding or knowing any of the obligations or responsibilities that a person might have. And they look at it as strictly something that is based on your financial well-being. But true wealth does not come from our financial well-being. This Sunday we have what I used to write down titles for my sermons. I don't anymore, partly because I read this one quote that says that titles for sermons are either boring or presumptuous. And I told that to the colleague I was working with at the time, and he was so offended because he really liked his titles, and that gave me great joy. But if I were to call this sermon a title, I would say it was the lessons from the widows. Because again, God is choosing and using people that rest of the world might not see as power brokers, as world changers. And yet it makes complete sense that Jesus and God refer to the widow, because for many of the widows, for them to simply survive, they have had to overcome obstacles that most of society would not have to have. Especially in the time of Jesus and Elijah, although unfortunately still to this day, it is a very patriarchal system. And there are more opportunities for the men in the world than there would be for women. And for women who have been married and then have had their husbands die, and with or without children, they face a huge economic burden to try to make it, to get ahead. And they have to find a sense of strength and power and resource to even just make it day to day. So it shouldn't surprise us that people that have had to be so strong would be the ones that God would use to show the world who we are called to be. The first lesson from the widow in the story from Elijah, it reminds us that how we treat others is a reflection on how we see the world and how we see ourselves. The story, and I apologize, most of you will have heard this already at Fawcett's, but Elijah is in a battle with the king and the queen in Israel. And there's great evil going on, and finally God calls down a drought on Israel and also on the surrounding area through Elijah. And so when Elijah says there's going to be a drought, and then there's a drought, who are people going to blame? Well, they can blame God, but they're really going to blame Elijah. So Elijah's life is in danger, so he has to hightail it out. Elijah does a lot of running in his life. I don't know if you've noticed that, but he's constantly running off somewhere. But Elijah runs off again. And he runs right out of Israel to another land. And when he gets there, and God told him there will be a widow there to take care of you. And he gets to the gate, and again, it's a time of drought and famine. So not a lot of food, not a lot of water. Everything is going to be scarce. And he gets to the gate, and he sees this woman there. And he says to her, can you bring me something to drink? Again, it's a very patriarchal sort of society. He's going to sit and she's going to go to the well and get him water. But she says yes. She doesn't say, get lost or anything like that. She's kind and compassionate. She goes, she gets him water. And as she's doing that, he then, and again, drought and famine, has the audacity to say to her, oh, can you bring me a little bit of food too, please? And she turns around and she recognizes Elijah as a foreigner. She knows that he is not one of her people, her tribe, her group. And she says, I forget the exact wording, but by your God, because she does not even worship the same God as Elijah. She says, I am gathering sticks now and preparing my last meal. She is at the point of her life where she realizes she is going to die. But not only is she going to die, but her son is going to die alongside her. Imagine the despair and the hopelessness that must sit upon her. Imagine the reality of facing not only your own death, but the death of your son and being powerless to do anything about it. And so she is doing the one thing that is left to her. She's gathering up some sticks. She's making that last meal so they can eat it. And then she knows that will be it. I imagine in her city, a lot of people would just stop. They would just quit. The despair and the hopelessness would be like black holes in their lives, sucking out all life, all hope, all energy. And yet she does not. She moves towards Elijah and she gets him the water when he asks. And then she takes a step further. And when Elijah says, would you do this for me? And she tells her the state, Elijah blesses her. It doesn't necessarily sound like a blessing. It sounds pretty, pretty, again, like, yeah, make me a cake anyways. But then he tells to her those important words, do not be afraid. Because your meal will not run out. And your jug of oil will not fail you. Even though Elijah tells her this, even though she is made aware of this, the leap of faith that she must take to actually, that when food is so precious, when this is it and then they're going to die, yet still she says yes to the hope and to the promise. She says yes to the compassion and caring, and she makes Elijah a cake. She gives it to him. And then, sure enough, her oil does not stop. The mead does not run out. I often, the times when you go, oh, do I have any, oil left or anything? And you pour it, there's a little bit left. You think, oh, that's it. You put it away and you come back and you pour it again. There's still a little bit left. Maple syrup would be the best example because there always seems to be a little more maple syrup in it. But whenever that happens, I think of this story. And I think of how, every time she poured, she must be wondering, like, is this it? And yet still there was always more. For me, it's a beautiful example of our relationship with God. For that grace and that love. Because sometimes we look and we go, is God still going to be there? Is that love and that grace still going to be present? And we pour and it's there. And the next time we pour and it's there again and again and again. I've shared this story before, but it is one of those that seems appropriate on this morning. But my grandmother was a widow. When my mom was 12 and she had two older sisters, my grandfather died in an accident. And my grandmother was left with the farm to run. And she ended up taking cleaning jobs at different places. And I think she did eventually move to Winnipeg for a while. But for a while she was on the farm, and she was raising her 3 daughters as best she could with very limited resources. And they had one cow that they milked, and that cow was the source of butter, of milk, and if there was anything left over, they would sell that as well. And one night she goes to milk the cow, and it's dark, and the cow has pulled its rope and is gone. And even though we always have this impression of Manitoba as just this wide open, flat, no trees, there was a lot of bush in Manitoba. And there was a lot of bush where she was living at the time. And the cow had gone into the bush. And even today, but especially in those days, you could go for miles and miles and miles and miles and not step onto a field. So she steps into the bush and she's looking for her cow, and it's dark. And today you can buy these big, huge, bright flashlights, but in those days, no. So I think she actually had a lantern she was carrying and walking through the woods, and she cries out to God. I forget exactly how she told me, but basically this, why have you abandoned me, God? Why have you taken the one thing that I need and have left us to die? And she's walking through the woods and she's crying out to God when, and this is my grandmother. My grandmother is not someone who's she didn't make things very flowery. She didn't overstate things. Now, she was a good Mennonite. She understated everything. And so she was and she says, and then God spoke to me. And in a very matter-of-fact way. And she says, and God said to me, Nettie, have I ever abandoned you? Have I ever left you with nothing? And when my grandmother heard that, when she heard that, out through the bush, the cow's head appears. And she grabs the cow and she leads it back. And she said, as bad as things would get, and things continued not to be easy, she always remembered that God said, I would not leave you with nothing. The other funny thing that happened is my grandmother had a field, and she couldn't work it, but a neighbor who was a farmer, he worked his own fields, and then he would work her field as well. Because the idea was you take care of widows in that community. But he'd always talk to her, and he'd always be slightly, not frustrated, but kind of bewildered. He would say, I do your field like I do the others, but I do your field last. And yet your field always has the greatest production. Like there is more on your field than any of my fields. And I do not know why. Years later, I wonder if he maybe just tells her that. But I think about it, no, that's not a real Mennonite thing to do. They would just be straightforward and honest. But somehow my grandmother's fields always continued to produce well. Though it is dark, yet God is still there. Though we might not feel the presence of God, though we might be facing those black holes of despair and hopelessness, still yet God stands between us and those dark places. The widow in the gospel passage reminds us that though we feel like we have nothing, we are, this is that stupid commercial, we are more precious and valuable than we know. Not because of our bank accounts, but because God sees what we do and values what we contribute. People tend to focus on what we do not have. And if they do not have a lot, then what they do have becomes very precious to them, and yet other people might think it as worthless. It's like the person who drives a beater car that has patches all over it, has been fixed 15 different times, and everyone is like, what a piece of junk. And yet for the person who needs that car is incredibly valuable. Imagine what those 2 pennies were for that poor widow, or those 2 copper coins worth a penny. And yet she gives that because she wants to contribute to God. It's to the temple and to the place and the presence of God, and she wants to do that. Even when she probably knows that everyone would dismiss what she has to offer. Everyone would say to her, what value is that? Yet still for her, it was important to do what she could do for God's place. When we choose to engage, when we give with others in our mind, we move the world. And if we think we don't have a lot to give, well, maybe the world might see that, but that is not how God sees us. That is not how God understands what we have to contribute. Be it 2 copper coins, be it whatever it is, every time we choose to engage, every time we choose to make a difference, God blesses us. Mrs. Keller grew up in the house that her parents had bought. And she spent her early years on that street, and she knew everyone on her street, both sides. And as Mrs. Keller grew older and she got married, she and her husband moved into the basement of the house with her parents. And when her parents passed away, she and her husband then moved upstairs, and she had been on that street. And when her husband died and her children said, you should move, Mom, she said, no, this is my home. And at 84 years, Mrs. Keller had only ever had one address in her life. And yet her children kept telling her to move because the community was not the same as it was 84 years ago. At that point, it was kind of a vibrant part of the city, and now it was not vibrant. Now it was run down, and the whole community had changed around her. The blocks around, the police cars, the going constantly, the violence that was taking place. Mrs. Keller had actually been mugged twice. Mrs. Keller was old, but she wasn't stupid. She never carried much money with her. She would just carry enough with what she needed. And the first time the person robbed her, he was kind of like, when she held out her wallet, and he said, "Is that all you have?" And she opened it up, and he was like, "Never mind," and he walked away. The second time, the assailant was angry with her, and it almost looked like he was going to hit her, when suddenly he turned and he ran away. Mrs. Keller, though, refused to move, no matter what kind of pressure her children put upon her. She refused to leave the only place that had ever been home for her. And she refused to leave the street that felt so much a part of her. And even though when she was 4 years old and she knew everyone on that street, at the age of 84, she still knew everyone on that street. And she would go, anytime someone new would pop up, she would be there knocking the plate of cookies and well wishes. And 4 times in the year, in spring, she would do it around Easter if she could. She did something in the summer, and she would do something in the fall around Thanksgiving, and Christmas was her favorite time because she would bring cookies to each house on that street and a card. And the community changed, and it became far more diverse and different, and you had people that didn't speak English, and yet Mrs. Keller was not at all deterred by that. She would show up day and time again and again, and she, at 84 years old, still kind of took care of her yard, except that neighbors would always come and help her. As soon as she stepped out on her yard, there'd be a neighbor to help shovel it in the winter or cut the grass and stuff. But she still took care of them. She would plant her flowers, and she would give the flowers to the other people on the street. But her kids were worried about her son in particular, because it was a high crime area. And so one day, the son showed up after her birthday, and with his own son, and he was begging her to please leave, to please move someplace. He knew that this was her home, but for the sake of him and for his siblings and for her grandchildren, they would just sleep better if they knew that she was in a safe place. And as he's talking, he says, "And look at this street." And his son, Mrs. Keller's grandson, all of a sudden he looked around and said, this street is different. And the father said, what do you mean? He goes, no, like when we were driving here, all the places were run down, the fences torn down, but look, every place on this street, their yard is kind of nice. So this is a nice community. And the son tells the grandson, shut up, because he's trying to get his mother to move. But the grandson, oh, no, it's different, Dad. Can't you see that? And the son is going, look, Mom. He kind of pushes the son aside and says, look, Mom, you need to move. When suddenly her neighbor, Mr. Brown, came forward. And he had been in the yard working while they had been talking outside. And Mr. Brown was big. Mr. Brown looked like he could handle himself, and Mr. Brown looked like he had to handle himself on different occasions. And he was a large man, and most people, when he stepped into their space, would take a step back. He had a kind of an intimidating presence about him. And when he started to walk forward, Mrs. Keller's son was thinking, oh, okay, this guy is coming into my space. But as soon as Mr. Brown looked at Mrs. Keller, a huge smile broke across his face. And it was as if somehow he changed. And he came and he says, Mrs. Keller, and greeted and introduced himself to her son and to his grandson. And he said, I apologize. I'm deeply sorry, but I overheard your conversation. I'm a nosy neighbor, he says. And I just want you to know that your son, your grandson, Mrs. Keller, is right. This street is different. I don't know if you've noticed it, but our street is different from an 8-block radius to any street around. We are the only street where every yard is taken care of. The only street where you have people waving and saying hello to each other. And looked at the son. In case you don't understand quite what this means, the average house on this street is worth $30,000 to $50,000 more than all the houses on the streets around us. Our property value is up. He says people here know each other, they wave to each other, they talk. When people come, they don't know English. We take turns teaching them English. Our kids play together. We are a different kind of street. He says, and the only reason that is because of your mother. She makes sure that we know everyone who lives on this street. She makes sure that when something bad happens, when the neighbors 2 streets over, when their husband had an accident, Mrs. Keller got us all involved in making sure that they had groceries and food. She is our saint. And you might not think that she is safe. And I can understand this community does not have a great reputation, but I want you to know, and I apologize for telling you this, Mrs. Keller, because we have never told you this before, but every time you leave the house, someone from the community follows you. We do not let you walk these streets alone because you are too precious to us. You are too important. That one day when that mugger came, well, the second one, after the first one, that's when we decided we were following you. We could not risk losing you. And it was my turn that week when that second one stepped forward. And when he turned and he saw me coming, he ran. And we follow you not because we're concerned about our home value, not because we're concerned about anything else, but because you have shown us a better way of being. Your love and your compassion. What the police and the authorities try to do on all the streets around us pale in comparison to what you do, simply by doing the small things. If you want your mom to move, I understand. But please know that one of the things she is always safe and always looked after on this street. We don't understand sometimes the power of 2 copper coins. We don't understand the power of holding a door open for someone. A kind, simple word, a smile, a nod. We don't understand the power that we have in those small little things that we do, yet that is how we move and change the world. In spite of what the Bank of Nova Scotia might think, we are more powerful than we know. And no matter who you are, no matter what your state in life is, we are far more precious in the eyes of God than we can ever fully understand. And so I invite us to spend our 2 copper coins, to extend our hands and our grace to others, because in this way we truly build the kingdom of God.